Hey guys, tonight we slip into the quiet stone courtyards of an Ethiopian monastery, high on a mountain plateau where the air tastes thin and the stars lean close. Torches flicker along the walls, throwing long shadows that make the painted saints look like they're listening. Monks move slowly in their white cotton robes, bare feet whispering against worn flagstones. And the only sound louder than your own breathing is the gentle trickle of water. It's not a fountain, not a stream, it's time itself, dripping patiently into a clay bowl. You step closer, and you realize this is no ordinary evening. The monks here have no wristwatches, no glowing phone screens. Instead, they keep the hours of prayer with water clocks, ancient clepsydras, bowls and jars that measure time by the steady flow of droplets. It looks simple, almost too simple, until you realize these monks have been doing this for centuries, long before most of the world could imagine time ticking with gears. Their nights, their prayers, even their meals unfold by water's rhythm. And a quick reality check. You probably wouldn't survive a single night on this schedule. Imagine being woken at midnight for hours of chanting, again before dawn, again in the blazing afternoon heat. Your modern alarm clock would weep and beg for mercy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing the map of sleepy dots all across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The courtyard is alive with preparation. Clay bowls are set on stone pedestals, filled carefully from leather skins. The monks crouch with the calm precision of gardeners tending seedlings. Each drop of water is a seed of time, planted in darkness to bloom into bells. A young novice leans too close and nearly tips one over, earning a gentle swat from an elder. Joke one trickles in. It's comforting to know that even in the 14th century, someone was still bad at pouring without spilling. Mainstream fact. Ethiopian monasteries, particularly in the medieval and early modern periods, were known for their unique adaptations of water clocks to keep canonical prayer hours. While such clocks existed in many parts of the world, Ethiopia's monastic system depended heavily on them, blending imported ideas with local ingenuity. The bowls themselves are marked with notches inside, subtle rings showing how long it takes for water to reach each level. When the surface touches a mark, a monk strikes a bell, and the community rises or kneels. You crouch to see, and you notice the ripples glowing in lamplight. Time here doesn't tick, it shimmers. Quirky tidbit. Some monks swore that certain bowls sang more faithfully than others, making softer or sharper drips depending on how the clay was fired. A few even gave names to their favorite bowls, as though they were elderly companions. You imagine a novice whispering, "Don't trust brother a baby's bowl, it always runs slow." The courtyard fills with a faint chorus of sounds, dripping, bells, sandals, whispers. The system is both fragile and dependable, a contradiction that feels strangely fitting. Historians still argue whether Ethiopia's water clocks came directly from earlier Hellenistic or Islamic models, or whether they developed independently as local solutions to monastic discipline. Either way, standing here you sense no anxiety about origins. For the monks, water has always been the most honest clock. Joke 2 drops into the basin. Somewhere in the future, a programmer will be debugging a glitch in digital timekeeping, and these monks would smirk and say, "Should have stuck with bowls." The first bell of evening sounds, struck by a wooden mallet against bronze. The monks bow and file into the chapel, voices rising in chant. You linger a moment longer in the courtyard, watching the bowls. Each drop feels like a footstep on the long path of history, and you realize you're already walking it, one ripple at a time. Joke 3 hums along with the chant, "If you're falling asleep already, don't worry." The monks would say that's perfectly holy. Drowsiness is practically a form of prayer in this place. The lamps flicker lower. The bowls keep dripping, and the monastery slips into its night-long dialogue with time. A dialogue you're about to overhear. Heartbeat by heartbeat, drop by drop. The chant fades into stone corridors, leaving you outside with the silence of the Ethiopian highlands. You tilt your head back, and the sky presses down like a velvet dome, thick with stars you almost feel you could scoop up with your hands. The mountains rise all around, jagged outlines etched in silver by the moon. Up here in the Ethiopian plateau, the air is so thin you catch yourself breathing more deeply, and the cool wind carries the scent of juniper fires smoldering in nearby huts. The monastery feels anchored in this vastness. Its walls are built from the same volcanic rock you see scattered across the hillsides, as though the mountain itself volunteered to shelter the monks. By day, the heat blazes across the plateau, turning the rock into a skillet and the air into a shimmer. But at night, the temperature drops fast, sharp enough to make your skin gooseflesh. Joke 1 wanders by wrapped in a blanket. It's one of those climates where you wake up sweating under a wool cloak and end the night wishing you'd brought another. Mainstream fact: many of Ethiopia's monastic communities were founded high in the northern and central plateaus, especially in regions like Tigray and Amhara. Their altitude, often over 2,000 meters above sea level, gave them cooler nights, thinner air, and long horizons of silence that shaped how monks lived, prayed, and kept time. You walk along the monastery wall, running your hand over the rough stone. Beyond the enclosure, terraced fields cling to the slopes, dotted with barley, teff, and lentils. Farmers, too, live by rhythms of the highlands: the rainy season and the dry, the glow of dawn and the stretch of dusk. But inside the monastery, the rhythm is different. Here, it's the drip of water bowls, the bell that carries across valleys, the voice that cuts the night in psalms. Quirky tidbit: some visitors reported that in highland monasteries, the sound of dripping water from a clepsydra could carry far in the stillness, like a second kind of heartbeat for the community. A shepherd passing outside the walls might claim he could hear time being measured in the monk's courtyard. You wonder if the shepherds exaggerated, or if the silence really was so total that a drip sounded like a drum. The thin air makes everything sharper: the crack of sandals on stone, the hiss of wind through acacia branches, even the creak of the water bowls shifting slightly as they fill. You glance toward the horizon. The plateau stretches away, dry and dark, dotted with flickers of fire where villages huddle. The mountains block travel, but they also guard solitude. That solitude became the monk's greatest ally. No interruptions, no city clocks, only the patient measurement of water to frame the day. Historians still argue whether Ethiopian monasteries adopted highland isolation mainly for spiritual retreat or practical survival. Some suggest they sought silence to focus on prayer. Others argue it was about defensibility from raiders. Whatever the reason, the altitude left its stamp not only on lungs but also on time itself, dripping slower in the chill, quicker when the midday sun boiled the air. A novice walks past, carrying a jar of water on his back. His shadow is long and unsteady, but his pace is calm. He glances at you and half smiles, as though inviting you to help him carry his burden. You don't, of course. You're already busy carrying the weight of history, but you admire his balance. Joke 2 shifts the jar on his shoulders. In another life, this kid could have been a champion at water bottle yoga. The courtyard ahead brightens briefly as a lamp is lit. You hear the faint plunk of a droplet hitting a bowl, steady as breath. The sound is a reminder that even in the endless wilderness, the monks have carved out their own order, not measured by the sun or stars, but by a more intimate rhythm. Mainstream fact number 2. Ethiopian monasteries often combined natural rhythms, like sunrise and sunset, with artificial ones, water clocks and bells. The blend of environmental cues and mechanical timekeeping created a uniquely Ethiopian monastic schedule, distinct from European or Middle Eastern practices. Quirky tidbit number 2. Travelers sometimes joked that monks in these mountains knew the time better than the roosters did. A late crow could be ignored, but the drip of the bowl never lied. Unless, of course, someone knocked it over. Joke 3 leans against the monastery gate. Imagine the ancient equivalent of, "Sorry, I overslept," being, "The bowl was too slow last night." Not the most convincing excuse, but probably used more than once. The night grows deeper. stars wheeling silently overhead, and the plateau breathes like a great animal around you. The mountains hold their silence. The monastery keeps its rhythm. And you keep walking, tracing the outline of a world where time is not shouted, but whispered, one droplet at a time. You return to the courtyard where the bowls gleam faintly in lamplight. And now you notice details you missed before. Each vessel is different. Some are wide and shallow, others narrow-necked like wine flasks. A few are carved from stone, rough and pitted. Most are clay, their rims smoothed by centuries of handling. They sit in careful rows, each one part of the monastery's heartbeat. You kneel beside one and hear the soft plink as a droplet breaks the surface. The ripple widens, fades, and then comes the next. Time here is not invisible. It dances. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian water clocks worked much like their counterparts elsewhere in the ancient world. Some operated by filling bowls that slowly sank when full, others by allowing water to drip through a hole in the bottom into a receiving basin. The pace of filling or draining marked specific intervals, which monks matched to their canonical prayer hours. These clepsydras may have been inspired by earlier Greek, Coptic, or Islamic designs, but the Ethiopian monasteries made them their own. A novice crouches with you, pointing to faint lines scratched on the inside of a bowl. They're subtle grooves, marking divisions like rings in a tree. When the water reaches each line, the boy explains, a bell is struck. You peer in and realize the lines aren't evenly spaced. The top ones are closer together, the bottom ones wider apart. Quirky tidbit: the monks compensated for how water pressure changes as the bowl empties, making sure the drip stayed roughly consistent. In other words, even their analog clock had built-in calibration. Imagine engineers hunched over clay, muttering about flow rate, centuries before anyone owned a stopwatch. Joke 1 strolls past with a shrug. You thought your bathroom sink dripped annoyingly, but apparently it was just auditioning to be a timekeeper. Around the courtyard, monks tend to the different bowls as if each were a pet with its own temperament. One vessel leaks faster in the dry season, another gets stubborn when the air turns damp. Some have been patched with resin, where a crack once let time escape too quickly. The monks have memorized these quirks, so they know when to add a ladle of water or shave off a fraction of a minute with the bell. Precision matters. Prayer hours must begin together, whether it's midnight matins or dawn lauds. Historians still argue whether these Ethiopian devices were standardized across monasteries or largely improvised locally. Some suggest there was a shared tradition, taught from master to novice, spreading from one monastic school to another. Others believe each monastery tinkered with its own bowls, developing slightly different systems that matched their community's rhythm. The lack of uniform surviving artifacts leaves the debate open, and you can almost picture two historians squabbling like rival monks over whose bowl dripped more wholly. Mainstream fact number 2: water clocks were especially useful at night, when sundials and shadows were useless. They allowed monks to keep vigil long after the sun's authority had faded, ensuring prayers aligned with sacred hours no matter the darkness. Quirky tidbit number 2: in some monasteries, the bowls were set into carved stone basins with small channels leading between them. The setup resembled a miniature water park, with drips feeding drips, and novices often got scolded for staring too long at the ripples instead of focusing on their chanting. The bell strikes again. 2 short tones that echo across the courtyard. The monks stir from their benches, shuffling toward the chapel. You stay behind a moment, watching the bowls. The water is steady, relentless, and you realize this is not just technology but devotion. To watch water drip into a bowl for hours is to meditate on patience itself. Joke 2 leans against the basin. If mindfulness apps had been invented here, they'd just be recordings of a leaky jar. You reach into a bowl and let a drop fall on your fingertip. It's cool, cleaner than you expect, drawn from the monastery's cistern. The drop slides down your hand and vanishes, as though reminding you that every moment passes once and never repeats. The monks don't fight that truth. They build their whole day around it. Nearby, a novice fumbles with a cracked pot. His elder shakes his head, muttering that it leaks like a lazy rooster. They patch it with clay, smoothing it carefully, and reset it on its stand. The rhythm resumes, uninterrupted. Joke 3 whispers. Even in a monastery, plumbing problems are eternal. The courtyard settles again. The bowls continue their song. And you realize, here, time isn't a tyrant barking orders. It's a patient companion, dripping steadily at your side, reminding you to breathe, to kneel, to rise, to rest. The bowls shimmer in their quiet rhythm, but soon you hear another sound joining the drip, a deep bronze note carried on the mountain air. A monk steps forward, mallet in hand, and strikes the monastery's bell. The tone rolls out across the courtyard, bounces against stone walls, and spills into the valley beyond. The monks inside pause their prayers just long enough to realign, and villagers outside the walls lift their heads as if reminded by an invisible conductor. In this place, bells replace roosters. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian monasteries used bells to mark canonical hours, often rung in coordination with water clocks. Unlike village life, which followed sunrise, roosters, or agricultural tasks, monastic life required exact divisions. Matins in the deep night, prime at dawn, vespers at dusk. Water measured the moment, but bells announced it. You follow the bell ringer, a thin monk with hands calloused from years of steady strikes. He stands near a timber frame where 2 bells hang. One is small and sharp-toned, used for ordinary hours. The other is large, booming like a low drum, reserved for great feasts or emergencies. He knows exactly how hard to swing the mallet. Not so soft that the sound fades, not so hard that the neighbors wonder if the mountain is cracking. Quirky tidbit: some monasteries trained novices by having them practice bell striking on logs before graduating to bronze. Imagine a courtyard filled with boys whacking stumps in rhythm, sounding like a forest percussion band. You can almost hear the monks muttering, "Not like that, child, you'll wake the goats." Joke 1 leans against the frame. This might be history's earliest drum circle, except the goal wasn't relaxation. It was making sure no one missed 3 a.m. prayers. The bell's echo carries down into the valley, where farmers and shepherds take note. They may not need to chant psalms at midnight, but they appreciate knowing dawn is near or evening chores should be wrapped up. The monastery's timekeeping seeps into village life, even for those who never step inside the walls. Historians still argue whether this overlap was intentional. Did monasteries deliberately serve as public clocks for surrounding communities, or was it a side effect of their devotion? Some evidence suggests rulers encouraged monasteries to regulate regional rhythms, while other accounts imply villagers simply borrowed the bell schedule without asking. Either way, the sound carried authority. Mainstream fact number 2. Bells were also used in liturgy itself, struck at key moments during Mass, signaling transitions for clergy and worshippers. In Ethiopia, their integration with water clocks created a hybrid system. Time measured silently by dripping bowls, then declared publicly by ringing metal. You linger by the bell frame watching the monk's movements. Each strike is followed by a pause, as if he listens to the valley respond. And it does. Dogs bark, donkeys bray, a late shepherd curses softly, probably realizing he's behind schedule. The bell ringer allows himself the faintest smile. Quirky tidbit number 2. There are stories of rival monasteries ringing their bells slightly early or late, causing confusion in the countryside about which schedule to follow. Imagine 2 time zones only a few miles apart, one insisting it's midnight prayers, while the other still thinks it's Compline. Joke 2 pops in with a smirk. So if you've ever shown up early to work because your phone adjusted to the wrong time zone, just know monks were already dealing with that problem 600 years ago. The bell ringer rests his mallet against the frame and bows his head, whispering a short prayer. To him, striking the bell isn't just work. It's part of worship, a way of joining his body to the community's rhythm. His arms ache some nights, but he never misses. He knows that if the bowl drips alone, time is private. But if the bell rings, time becomes shared. The courtyard grows quiet again, the bronze still humming faintly in the stones. You close your eyes and feel the vibration in your ribs. Joke 3 hums along. Congratulations. You've just become a tuning fork for medieval monastic scheduling. When you open your eyes, the stars haven't shifted much. But you realize another hour has passed. The bowls keep dripping. The bell keeps waiting. And the monastery breathes in rhythm, drawing the whole valley into its pulse. The bronze hum fades, and your feet carry you deeper into the complex, where the air grows cooler and damper. A narrow passage opens into a stone chamber, and at the center lies something unexpected. A carved basin so large you could lie down in it. The monks call it their mother cistern, the source from which all their time flows. Torchlight flickers over its water, and you see channels cut into the rock, narrow grooves guiding the liquid towards smaller bowls. It looks like plumbing, but it feels like liturgy. Mainstream fact: many Ethiopian monasteries had carved stone cisterns or reservoirs, sometimes built into the very rock of the mountain. These cisterns collected rainwater or channeled it from nearby springs. From there, monks could divert water through small channels to feed their clepsydras. The system ensured a steady, gravity-fed supply even during dry months. A novice stoops with a wooden scoop, filling a jar to top off the bowls outside. You kneel to examine the channels more closely. They snake across the floor in graceful curves, polished by centuries of water. Some even have tiny gates carved from wood, which the monks raise or lower to control the flow. Quirky tidbit: one chronicle mentions a monastery where the novices competed to carve decorative fish into the sides of the channels, little stone doodles swimming alongside the stream of time. One still lingers here, its scales smoothed, almost invisible. Joke 1 wades in with sandals squeaking. You can't help thinking this chamber is half plumbing, half art project, and entirely more impressive than your leaky kitchen tap. The basin itself smells faintly of earth and moss. Its surface reflects the ceiling vault, painted with faded saints and stars. As you watch, a drop plinks from the ceiling into the water, sending ripples outward. You realize that this room measures two kinds of time: the cosmic, painted above, and the dripping, flowing below. Historians still argue whether Ethiopian cisterns were primarily for practical water storage or explicitly designed with timekeeping in mind. Some suggest the systems were adaptations of older irrigation methods, repurposed for monastic use. Others claim the intentional design of channels leading to clepsydras proves a theological integration. Water wasn't just sustenance, it was schedule. Mainstream fact number 2. Similar stone cisterns can still be found in Ethiopian monasteries today, though many have fallen into disrepair. Inscriptions on some suggest they were built as early as the 13th century, aligning with periods of monastic expansion. The novice looks up from his work, grinning as he balances a jar almost too big for him. He wobbles but manages not to spill. His elder nods approvingly but reminds him in a stern voice that even one missing jar can throw off the entire rhythm of the bells. Time here is delicate, and each drop counts. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some monasteries appointed a specific keeper of the water, a monk whose entire duty was making sure the cisterns and bowls never ran dry. If the flow faltered, he was blamed for losing the hour. One can imagine the poor man sighing, "Yes, I lost time today, but only because Brother Johannes drank half of it." Joke 2 splashes at your ankles. Suddenly you realize that medieval monks probably had the same stress dreams you do, except instead of missing the bus, theirs was forgetting to refill the water clock. The chamber is hushed, but not silent. You hear the slow gurgle of a channel, the faint scrape of the novice's jar, the steady beat of your own heart. The room seems alive, as though time itself is resting here before being poured out. You crouch and touch the stone edge. It's cool, damp, smooth where countless hands have touched before. The novice finally hoists his jar and disappears down the passage. You follow, glancing back at the basin one last time. In the torchlight, it gleams like a black mirror. For a moment, you imagine all of Ethiopia's nights flowing through it, drip by drip, hour by hour, filling the bowls, ringing the bells, guiding the prayers. Joke 3 whispers from the ripples, "If time really is money, this monastery has been saving it in a stone bank for centuries." You step back into the night air, carrying the faint smell of moss and stone with you. Outside, the bowls are full again, their ripples steady. The monks glance at them, then at the stars, then at each other. And you realize, this whole mountain is a clock, the cistern its heart, the bowls its ticking hands. You pause in the courtyard again, and a voice reaches your ear, low, deliberate, almost as if it's aimed at you. A monk with a long, graying beard sits on a bench near the dripping bowls, his eyes half closed. He gestures for you to come closer. His robe pools around his ankles like folded parchment, and when he finally speaks, it's less instruction than confession. He tells you he has spent decades listening to water mark the hours, but sometimes he wonders whether this time is God's time or merely human time dressed up in piety. The bowl drips steadily beside him, as if joining the debate. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian monastic theology revolved around the liturgical hours: matins, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline. Prayers intended to mirror heavenly order. Yet monks often wrestled with whether their clocks measured divine eternity or human approximation. In manuscripts, some writers equated water's flow with God's mercy, while others insisted it was simply a tool for discipline. The monk runs a finger along the rim of a bowl, tracing its notches. When the drop strikes, is it heaven commanding me to rise, or only clay and gravity pretending to? He murmurs. His lips twitch into a smile, amused by his own audacity. You realize doubt here isn't rejection, but meditation. Quirky tidbit. A few Ethiopian chronicles record playful debates between monks, whether angels kept time in heaven with stars, with water, or with some measure beyond human grasp. One story tells of a monk who claimed Gabriel himself once tapped his shoulder at matins, whispering, "You're late." The others teased him for years, calling him Gabriel's alarm clock. Joke one stirs like a chuckle in the dark. It's comforting to know that even in holy silence, someone was still late enough to earn a heavenly nudge. The elder monk leans back, eyes on the stars above the monastery wall. He points to Orion's belt rising over the horizon. Some brothers argue we should pray by the constellations. They are steady, eternal. But clouds hide them, while water never lies, except when it does. He grins. And then we argue again. Historians still argue whether Ethiopian timekeeping leaned more heavily on astronomical observation or mechanical clepsydras. Some sources emphasize monks tracking stars for seasons and prayer hours, while others highlight reliance on dripping bowls. Likely, both methods coexisted, their balance shifting with weather, tradition, or even personal preference. The monk sighs, then lifts his bowl, letting the water trickle onto the stones. "This bowl cannot contain eternity," he says, "but it can remind me not to waste it." He places it back carefully, as though returning a fragile truth. Mainstream fact number 2. Theological debates about time were not unique to Ethiopia. Across Christendom, monks wrestled with how human-made devices, whether sundials, clepsydras, or later mechanical clocks, fit into divine order. Ethiopian discussions were part of this broader medieval meditation on whether time was created for man's convenience or inscribed in the universe itself. Quirky tidbit number 2, some Ethiopian manuscripts describe time in agricultural metaphors: hours as seeds scattered by God, days as fields watered by prayer. In that sense, monks saw themselves as gardeners of time, tending drops as carefully as crops. Joke 2 stretches on the bench beside you. Imagine filling out your daily planner only to discover half the slots marked, "God knows, check the bowl." The monk closes his eyes again, not asleep but listening. The drip continues, steady, patient, merciless. You realize that in his doubt, he has found something more profound than certainty. A rhythm that forces him to wonder, again and again, whose clock he is really following. Joke 3 ripples from the basin. The irony, of course, is that whether or not it's divine, the bowl still wakes you up at midnight. Philosophy is lovely, but gravity always wins. The bell rings faintly from the chapel, and the monk rises without hesitation, his body already trained to obey. He bows slightly to you before shuffling away, robes whispering against the stones. You sit in his place for a moment, tracing the bowl's rim as he did, and the drip answers your thoughts with the only sermon it knows: plink, plink, plink. You follow the elder's footsteps into the scriptorium, where the air smells of wax and ink, and the only light comes from oil lamps flickering over parchment. Monks sit cross-legged at low tables, their reed pens scratching like insects across the page. The chants from the chapel drift faintly through the stone, but here the rhythm is quieter. Scrape, drip, sigh, repeat. You notice that even these scribes keep one eye on the bowls of water placed nearby, as though their writing itself must breathe in time with the dripping. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian monasteries were centers of manuscript culture, producing illuminated Bibles, psalters, and theological texts in gaze, the ancient liturgical language. Scribes often worked by lamplight, their hours divided not only by prayer, but by the steady keeping of water clocks that told them when to pause, when to stand, when to sing. A young scribe dips his pen, then glances quickly at the bowl beside him. The water has almost reached the second notch. He nudges the monk next to him, who nods and adjusts his pace, finishing a line before the next bell summons them to prayer. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes apparently drew tiny droplet symbols in manuscript margins, little reminders of when they had paused for timekeeping duties. Modern scholars puzzle over these doodles, debating whether they were whimsical markers or practical notes like paused here when the bell rang. Joke 1 tiptoes into the room. Imagine trying to finish your homework while your clock literally leaks onto the floor. The lamplight gleams off sheets of vellum, illuminating brilliant red and gold letters. The monk's chant outside seems to sync with the drip inside. You realize that copying scripture here isn't just about preserving words, it's about weaving time itself into the page. Each word is tethered to a droplet, each prayer hour sealed in ink. Historians still argue whether water clocks were used primarily to regulate prayers, or whether their influence stretched deep into the rhythm of copying, reading, and teaching. Some accounts suggest scribes structured entire work sessions by the bowls, pausing only when water marked the hour. Others argue that the scriptorium had more freedom, guided by daylight as much as dripping water. The lack of detailed notes leaves scholars debating how universal this watery metronome really was. The novice nearest you yawns, quickly stifling it with his sleeve. His elder frowns but doesn't scold. Instead, he taps the parchment, whispering a reminder that writing itself is prayer, each stroke a form of devotion. The novice nods, cheeks flushing, and bends back to his task. Joke 2 peers over his shoulder. You can tell he's thinking that some prayers are longer than others, especially when your reed pen keeps splitting. Mainstream fact number 2. Gaze manuscripts from Ethiopian monasteries often contained colophons, little notes at the end where scribes recorded their names, prayers, or even complaints. Some confessed exhaustion. Others asked future readers to pray for their souls. Imagine centuries later, scholars reading these weary voices and realizing that monks once struggled to stay awake just like you. Quirky tidbit number 2. One scribe's note, translated loosely, says, "I wrote this by moonlight, and the bowl dripped too fast tonight." It's both a historical record and the medieval equivalent of grumbling about a broken clock. The bowls plink again, and the bell follows. Pens are set down, pages are stacked carefully, weighed with stones to keep them from curling. The monks rise, stretching stiff shoulders, filing silently toward the chapel. The novice lingers, peeking once more at his unfinished line before running after the others. The water keeps dripping, unfazed by urgency or fatigue. Joke 3 chuckles from the corner. Somewhere, a monk probably prayed, not for holiness, but for the bowl to spring a leak so he could finish his paragraph early. The scriptorium grows empty, but the silence is filled by the rhythm of the bowls and the faint rustle of parchment. You sit for a moment, tracing the edge of an unfinished manuscript, and realize that every page you touch carries not only words, but hours. Hours measured in drops of water, in glances at notches, in bells that still echo across the highlands. The scriptorium quiets, but outside the courtyard bowls still whisper their rhythm. You crouch near one, watching the water's surface tremble under each falling drop. At first it seems mechanical, perfect, but then you notice something odd. Tonight the bowl fills faster than yesterday, the water creeping up the notches quicker than expected. A monk frowns, taps the rim, then shakes his head with resignation. Time, it seems, has decided to play tricks. Mainstream fact: water clocks in Ethiopia and elsewhere were notoriously sensitive to weather. In dry seasons, water evaporated more quickly, throwing off the measure. In humid or rainy conditions, bowls could fill unevenly. A steady drip was never truly steady. It bent with climate, temperature, and even the mineral content of the water. A novice mutters that the bowls are running hot, a phrase that makes you grin until you realize it's their way of saying the hours feel shorter than they should. Quirky tidbit: some monasteries even had nicknames for their seasonal mischief, calling fast-running bowls summer tongues and slow ones rain bellies. Imagine trying to pray on schedule while arguing whether the bowl had a bellyache. Joke 1 drips into place. So yes, monks suffered from the medieval version of your wall clock running fast after a dead battery. Except theirs didn't need batteries, just a stubborn cloud of evaporation. You glance at the surface again. The ripples are quicker, more urgent. The monk beside you sighs, adjusts the drip, and sprinkles a little dust into the bowl to slow evaporation. You raise an eyebrow, but he shrugs as though to say, "Time needs seasoning too." Historians still argue whether monasteries compensated for these quirks with mathematical precision, adjusting notches and volumes, or whether they simply shrugged and let God's weather decide the pace. Some chronicles suggest careful calibration rituals, while others hint at a more relaxed attitude. The bowl runs fast in summer, slow in rain, and heaven understands both. Mainstream fact number 2. In some traditions, bowls were recalibrated at seasonal transitions, with monks scratching new notches or swapping vessels entirely. This gave the clepsydra a built-in cycle, like a calendar woven into its very clay. Quirky tidbit number 2. A few bowls bore faint scorch marks where monks had set them too close to braziers in cold months. The extra warmth sped evaporation and made entire prayer services arrive early. You can almost hear the groaning, "Brother, why did you cook the hours?" Joke 2 flutters from the brazier. Somewhere out there is the first monk guilty of inventing daylight savings time by accident. The courtyard air cools further, and the bowls slow again, drops hanging in the air a fraction longer. You realize that in this place, time is not abstract but physical, pushed around by weather, nudged by air. Hours are elastic here, sometimes rushing, sometimes stretching, and the monks simply adapt, learning patience in both directions. A novice stares at the drip and asks his elder whether time changes when the water runs fast. The elder chuckles. "Time is God's, the bowl is ours. When it lies, we laugh and try again." His calm acceptance makes you wonder whether your own frantic modern clocks could use a little more laughter. Joke 3 leans against the rim. Imagine your boss calling to ask why you're late, and you calmly explain, "Sorry, humidity stretched my hour." The bell strikes, not exactly on cue, but close enough. The monks file into the chapel, their rhythm intact despite the bowl's mischief. The drip slows, steadies, and resumes its patient plinking. You stay behind, smiling, because in this monastery, even mistakes become part of the schedule. Time may wobble, but prayer goes on. The night deepens, and you notice the air has sharpened, almost biting against your skin. The monks pull their robes tighter as they shuffle back from the chapel, their breath rising in pale wisps. The bowls, too, begin to behave differently. Droplets hesitate at the lip before falling, as if the cold itself is stretching every second. By dawn, when the first orange glow brushes the horizon, the rhythm has changed again. The bowls drip faster now, the heat of the sun loosening everything. Mainstream fact: Ethiopia's highlands experience extreme temperature swings between day and night. At elevations above 2,000 meters, nights can be near freezing, while days soar uncomfortably hot. These fluctuations didn't just affect the monks' comfort, they directly impacted the performance of their water clocks. Cold slowed the flow, heat sped it up, creating a constant battle between climate and ritual. You lean over one bowl and see a thin film of ice forming on the rim. A novice rushes to break it with his fingertip, muttering about frozen time. Quirky tidbit. Some chronicles mention bowls cracking in sudden cold, forcing monks to scramble for replacements mid-service. You imagine the chaos of prayer chants interrupted by someone yelling, "Quick! Fetch another bowl!" Joke 1 crunches in like ice underfoot. Nothing says holy discipline like sprinting across a monastery at 3 a.m., carrying a spare pot. As the sun rises, the bowls warm quickly, and the drips tumble more freely. The monks know to expect this. They adjust their bells accordingly, striking slightly early in the morning and slightly late in the night. To them, it's less a flaw than a reminder that time belongs to creation, not to clay. Historians still argue whether these adjustments were carefully calculated or simply guided by experience. Some suggest monks measured water speed at different temperatures and scratched notches to match. Others believe they relied on intuition, letting each season train their ears to the rhythm of changing drips. Mainstream fact number 2. Across many cultures, water clocks were notoriously imprecise, but their reliability depended less on exact seconds than on consistency within context. For monks, it was enough that the hours roughly matched. The goal was prayer, not laboratory precision. You wander outside the monastery walls for a moment, and the contrast hits you even harder. The plateau air is icy in the shade, yet the rocks already radiate heat where the sun strikes them. Farmers below stir from their huts, blinking against the brightening day. A shepherd smacks his lips, deciding it's time to move his flock, not because of a rooster, but because he hears the monastery's bell echoing faintly across the valley. Quirky tidbit number 2. Villagers sometimes teased that the monks were chasing the sun with bowls, trying to pin down a sky that never kept still. The monks, in turn, reminded them that at least their bells rang more consistently than the rooster who sometimes crowed at random. Joke 2 tumbles with the drip. If your alarm clock ever goes off at wildly different times, just tell yourself you're living authentically monastic. You return to the courtyard as the bowls reach their mid-morning rhythm, dripping briskly now, splashing tiny halos of sunlight onto the stone. The monks glance at them, unconcerned, already accustomed to this daily shift. For them, the struggle isn't frustration, it's a chance to surrender, to remember that control is an illusion. The elder monk from earlier appears again, warming his hands over a brazier. He chuckles when he sees you watching the bowls. The cold steals our hours, the heat gives them back. Both belong to God, he says, tapping the rim lightly. The water jumps, startled, and resumes its steady dripping, as though embarrassed. Joke 3 smolders in the brazier. Apparently, even time itself gets stage fright when poked by an old monk. By midday, the monastery hums with activity. The bowls drip quickly now, their rhythm almost cheerful, keeping pace with chanting and chores. The monks adapt with ease, proving that time here is not rigid but flexible, an agreement negotiated daily between weather, water, and prayer. The day warms, and with it comes visitors. Dust rises on the narrow path leading up to the monastery, where a small caravan of travelers appears, merchants with donkeys, a priest from a distant church, and 1 or 2 curious foreigners with notebooks tucked under their belts. They arrive tired, thirsty, and blinking at the brightness of the highland sun. The monks welcome them with bowls of water, flatbread, and a shaded place to rest. Soon, the conversation drifts toward the monastery's curious instruments, the water clocks. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian monasteries were not entirely cut off from the wider world. Merchants, pilgrims, and even diplomats sometimes visited, bringing news from Islamic courts to the north and European travelers who had made their way inland. Several accounts from the 15th to 17th centuries describe outsiders remarking on the monks' use of clepsydras, comparing them with devices they had seen elsewhere. A visitor from Cairo squats by a bowl, watching the steady drip. He nods knowingly and tells the monks about elaborate water clocks in Islamic cities, ornate towers with automata, where roosters flapped and doors opened as the water measured hours. The monks listen politely, but they don't seem envious. Their bowls are humble, but they do the job. Quirky tidbit: One European traveler complained that the Ethiopian bowls were too simple to be called real clocks, but then admitted that the bells rang at exactly the right time for prayers. Accuracy, it seems, mattered more than decoration. Joke 1 clears its throat. Somewhere a monk probably muttered, "We don't need dancing puppets, thank you very much, our bowls drip just fine." A Jesuit missionary leans in, scribbling notes about the notched rims. He marvels at the adaptation to climate and altitude, remarking that in Europe, mechanical clocks were spreading through cathedrals. But here, water still ruled time. He wonders aloud whether these monks ever feel behind the times. The elder simply replies, "Time is not behind or ahead. It is only with us." The missionary frowns, perhaps realizing he has just been out-preached. Historians still argue whether these outside accounts exaggerated differences to highlight Ethiopia's uniqueness, or whether they recorded genuine cultural exchange. Some believe Europeans downplayed Ethiopian ingenuity to emphasize their own advanced technology, while others note that Ethiopian monasteries seemed content to blend imported knowledge with local practice rather than chase novelty. Mainstream fact number 2. There were indeed Islamic water clocks that dwarfed Ethiopian ones in complexity, such as those built in Damascus and Cairo. But Ethiopia's versions were designed to serve monastic life, not civic display. They were smaller, quieter, and deeply tied to liturgy rather than spectacle. The foreign visitors sip spiced coffee, watching the monks refill the bowls. They sketch diagrams, trade comparisons, and shake their heads in bemusement. The donkeys bray, unimpressed, perhaps more interested in leftover flatbread than philosophical debates about time. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some visitors swore the monks exaggerated their precision for outsiders, ringing bells a little earlier, just to appear disciplined. Others argued that the monks didn't care what foreigners thought, since their true audience was divine. Imagine the petty satisfaction of saying, "Yes, our bells are more accurate than your rooster. Thank you for noticing." Joke 2 stomps in with dusty boots. The real losers here were probably the poor donkeys, forced to listen to hours of conversation about dripping bowls when all they wanted was shade. As the sun climbs higher, the visitors take their leave, offering coins, blessings, or promises to write about the monastery in distant lands. The monks wave politely, already turning back to their duties. For them, visitors are interesting but temporary. The water bowls remain. The bell rings again, echoing down the valley, and you realize it's not only the monks who listen. Farmers in nearby fields pause to adjust their work. Travelers on the road glance toward the monastery, and children shout, "The monks say it's noon!" The water clock, simple as it is, commands attention across miles. Joke 3 grins under the bell. Somewhere in the valley, a farmer is muttering, "I didn't need the monks to tell me it's lunchtime, but I'll take it." The bowls drip on, unbothered by the comings and goings of foreigners. Their rhythm ties the monastery to the wider world, not through spectacle, but through quiet persistence. Outsiders may marvel or scoff, but here in the courtyard, time still belongs to water. The visitors have gone, the courtyard settles again, and the bowls resume their hushed dripping. A thin monk with sharp cheekbones and steady eyes approaches, holding a wooden mallet worn smooth by years of use. He's the monastery's official bell striker, and tonight you follow him through his shift. His name isn't recorded. You simply know him as the one who never misses an hour. Mainstream fact: in Ethiopian monasteries, specific monks were tasked with ringing the bells according to the water clock's rhythm. It wasn't a casual chore, but a full responsibility, demanding wakefulness through the night. If the bell was missed, the entire community's prayers fell out of order. He crouches by the lead bowl, studying the waterline as if it were scripture. When the drip reaches the next notch, he rises, steps to the bell frame, and delivers a measured strike. The sound rolls out like thunder wrapped in bronze. He bows, then returns to wait by the bowl. Over and over, the cycle continues. Watch, strike, return. Quirky tidbit: some monasteries gave their bell striker a nickname, the Hammer of Time. One chronicle even notes a monk who claimed his mallet was holier than his rosary because he spent more hours holding it. His abbot disagreed, but the joke stuck. Joke 1 winks from behind the bell, somewhere out there, a mallet is still dreaming of sainthood. The monk sits on a low stool, back straight, eyes half shut but never closed. You realize this isn't just vigilance, it's meditation. Each drip is a breath, each strike a heartbeat. He lives the hours in a way no one else does, chained not to sleep or food, but to the pulse of water. Historians still argue whether bell strikers rotated among monks or whether some served in the role for decades. Evidence suggests both. Smaller monasteries likely relied on one dedicated man, while larger ones had teams rotating shifts. In either case, the position was respected, if not envied. Mainstream fact number 2. Bells weren't struck casually, they followed set patterns. A single strike might mark an ordinary hour. Double strikes announced major offices like matins or vespers. On feast days, elaborate sequences of strikes echoed through the valleys, turning the monastery into a kind of living calendar. You watch as he rises again. The mallet arcs in his hand, a graceful swing that lands with precision. He waits for the sound to fade, then returns to his stool. Not once does he smile or frown. His face is the face of time itself. Calm, unchanging, dependable. Quirky tidbit number 2. Novices sometimes tried to mimic the bell striker's swing, often striking too hard and cracking smaller bells. There are records of abbots scolding them, reminding them that bells were expensive, not drums for practice. You can almost hear a weary sigh. This is not a concert, brothers. Meh. Joke 2 grins in the corner. Medieval monks were apparently one cracked bell away from inventing heavy metal. The night deepens. Stars spill across the sky, the air turns sharp, and the bell striker still waits. You feel drowsy, shifting your weight, but he does not. His entire body seems tuned to the drip, his spirit bound to the bowl, every notch filled, every strike delivered. His service is invisible, yet without him, the monastery's rhythm would collapse. Joke 3 leans on the mallet. Imagine explaining your life's work to a stranger. Yes, I hit the same bell every hour for 40 years. And yet somehow, it's more impressive than anything on your resume. The monk finally glances at you, and for the briefest moment, you think you see amusement flicker in his eyes, as though he knows you'd never survive one night in his shoes. He turns back to the bowl, ready for the next drip, the next strike, the next hour. The bell fades into the dark, and the monks gather in the chapel, their white robes like pale wings fluttering in the lamplight. You step in with them, and the air hits you, thick with incense, warm from candles, heavy with voices rising in unison. This is matins, the longest service of the night, a chant that stretches from one drip of the bowl to the next, paced entirely by water's patience. Mainstream fact: matins, or its Ethiopian equivalent in the liturgical cycle, often lasted hours. Monks rose in the middle of the night, sometimes around 2 or 3 a.m., to chant psalms and hymns. The length of the service depended not on the rooster or the sunrise, but on the measured hours marked by the clepsydras. The chanting begins softly, almost tentative, then builds like a river gathering strength. A psalm rises, deep voices carrying the melody, younger novices weaving lighter tones between them. The sound echoes off the stone vaults, folding back on itself until you feel as though the entire mountain is singing. You look down the aisle and see the bowls in the corner, dripping quietly, their rhythm guiding the unseen conductor. Quirky tidbit: in some monasteries, scribes noted that the chant tempo subtly shifted with the drip, slower in winter nights when the water froze sluggishly, faster in summer when it splashed more freely. You picture the odd scene of monks accidentally speed-singing psalms in July, huffing to keep up with over-caffeinated water. Joke 1 catches its breath. Imagine karaoke night being dictated by your plumbing. The service rolls on, psalm after psalm, hymn after hymn. You feel drowsy, then alert, then drowsy again, exactly as the monks must, fighting their own bodies to remain present. A novice nods off, his head jerking sideways until an elder gently pokes him awake. He blushes, joins the chant louder than before, and the others smirk without breaking rhythm. Historians still argue whether matins was always this long in Ethiopian monasteries, or whether certain communities shortened or lengthened it according to custom. Some evidence suggests stricter monasteries stretched the service nearly until dawn, while others finished earlier, giving the monks time to nap before prime. Mainstream fact number 2. Ethiopian chant traditions, known as Zima, are distinct, credited to Saint Yared in the 6th century. These chants formed the backbone of matins and other offices, combining complex melodies with rhythmic clapping or sistrum rattles in some settings. Even in the dead of night, the music was vibrant, anchored by dripping water and ringing bells. You watch as one monk shakes a sistrum, a rattle of metal discs, punctuating the chant. The sound shivers through the air like silver rain. Behind him, another monk keeps half an eye on the bowl, waiting for the water line to cross its next notch. When it does, the bell striker outside answers, and the chant surges into its next phase. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some chronicles hint at monks competing, quietly of course, over who could sustain the longest chant line without breathing. A few wrote notes in margins about being champion breath holder at matins. You smile, imagining spiritual devotion mixed with friendly one-upmanship. Joke 2 chuckles from the choir loft. So yes, medieval monks basically had their own Olympics, and the main event was singing without fainting. The hours pass. You lose track of how many psalms have been sung. The incense swirls thicker, and your eyelids droop, yet the monks keep steady, their bodies swaying gently, their voices unbroken. Somewhere, a novice suppresses a yawn so enormous it makes his eyes water. The elder beside him hides a grin, though his chant never falters. Joke 3 hums from the shadows. If sleep is prayer, as some monks say, then half this choir is already saints. Finally, the bell sounds again, marking the close of matins. The monks bow, whisper a final prayer, and file out slowly, their sandals whispering across the stone. The bowls continue their drip, unfazed, ready to guide the next hour. You step into the cool night air, your ears still ringing with music that feels less sung than carved out of time itself. The air outside is crisp, and the stars still blaze overhead. But the monastery does not fall into silence. As the monks step from the chapel, a small group lingers in the courtyard, voices lowered but intense. You ease closer and realize they are debating, not about scripture this time, but about time itself. For centuries, monks here have argued whether the truest guide to prayer is the dripping of water or the shining of stars. Tonight, the argument spills into the open again. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian monasteries, like many across Christendom, used both water clocks and astronomical observation to regulate their prayer schedules. Some monks relied on the clepsydra's steady drip, while others trusted the constellations and phases of the moon. The tension between mechanical and celestial timekeeping was never fully resolved. One elder points upward at Orion, his finger tracing the 3 stars of the belt. When these rise above the horizon, he insists, that is when we begin matins. The heavens do not lie. Another elder shakes his head, tapping the bowl beside him. But clouds hide the heavens. Water is always with us. It drips whether the stars are visible or not. Quirky tidbit: chronicles mention some monks teasing the star watchers, claiming they had stiff necks from staring upward all night. In return, the star watchers mocked the bowl watchers, accusing them of trusting mud and gravity more than God's firmament. You smile at the image of holy men trading jabs like schoolboys. Joke 1 twinkles overhead. Somewhere, the constellations must have chuckled, watching monks argue over which of them had the better alarm clock. The debate continues. A younger monk suggests compromise. Use the stars when skies are clear, the bowls when rain clouds smother the sky. His idea sounds reasonable, but the elders frown. Neither side wants to give ground. The bell ringer sighs, tapping his mallet against the frame absent-mindedly. He knows he'll be the one blamed if both bowl and stars disagree. Historians still argue whether Ethiopian monastic timekeeping leaned more toward astronomy or toward water, with some monasteries favoring one system almost exclusively. Manuscripts hint at a spectrum. Highland communities with clear skies preferred stars, while others buried in mist leaned heavily on dripping bowls. The arguments weren't just technical, they were theological, tied to how monks understood divine order. Mainstream fact number 2. Astronomical timekeeping wasn't unique to Ethiopia. In medieval Europe, for example, monasteries also used the stars to mark hours before widespread use of clocks. What makes Ethiopia distinctive is the coexistence of both traditions, celestial and aquatic, woven together in a single community. The elder pointing at the stars grows animated, describing how constellations mark seasons as well as hours, guiding farmers and travelers alike. "The heavens are scripture written in light," he declares. His rival gestures at the bowl, calm and steady. "And water is scripture written in earth." Their voices rise, not in anger, but in passion, as if both are desperate for time itself to choose sides. Quirky tidbit number 2. There is a story of one monastery split so firmly between star watchers and bowl watchers that they occasionally rang bells at different times, creating chaos for nearby villagers. Imagine 2 sets of chants echoing across the valley, one claiming midnight had arrived, the other insisting it was still complain. Joke 2 yawns beside you. And you thought arguments about daylight savings were bad. Finally, the abbot intervenes. His voice is quiet, but it silences the courtyard. The stars remind us of eternity. The water reminds us of mortality. Both are God's. Both are ours. Enough arguing. Let the bell decide. The monks bow their heads, though you notice a few glances upward and downward, stubborn loyalties lingering. The bell strikes, and everyone files back into rhythm, as though nothing had happened. The bowls drip, the stars glitter, and the night goes on, perfectly content to let humans wrestle with contradictions. Joke 3 winks from the rim of the bowl. The real winner of the debate is, of course, sleep, because while they argue, you're already drifting off. The courtyard empties, leaving only the plink of water and the hush of starlight. You realize the monks' debate is less about who's right and more about balance. Between sky and earth, permanence and fragility, eternity and the next drip. The courtyard empties, but beyond the monastery walls the valley is already stirring. The first pale streaks of dawn brush the ridges, and down below, farmers step from their huts, leading oxen to plowed terraces. Women balance clay jars on their heads, walking toward springs. Children trail behind, rubbing their eyes, and almost all of them glance toward the monastery, waiting for the next bell. Mainstream fact. Monastic bells often serve not only the monks, but also surrounding communities. Villagers listen for their sound to guide daily tasks, when to rise, when to break for meals, when to rest. In regions without mechanical clocks or widespread literacy, monasteries acted as the keepers of time for everyone within earshot. A farmer sharpens his hoe as the bell tolls, nodding in satisfaction. "It's the 3rd hour," he mutters, adjusting his schedule accordingly. His wife, kneading dough, sighs. She swears the bells run faster in summer, which means less time to rest. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers joked that monks stole time by letting their bowls drip too quickly, as though holy men were personally shaving minutes off everyone's day. Joke 1 leans against the plow. Somewhere, a medieval farmer probably muttered, "If those monks ring one more early bell, I'm demanding overtime." You watch as the village unfolds like a living clock face. Children run toward the fields carrying baskets, their laughter marking the playful seconds. The steady blows of axes in the forest become the ticking minutes. And above it all, the monastery bell strikes the hours, anchoring everyone to the same rhythm. Historians still argue whether monasteries intentionally provided time for villages or whether this was an incidental benefit. Some suggest abbots coordinated with local lords, agreeing to regulate work schedules. Others believe the villagers simply adopted the monastic rhythm without asking. Either way, the monastery became the valley's invisible timekeeper. Mainstream fact number 2. Agricultural life in Ethiopia, like elsewhere, already had natural markers. Sunrise, shadows, rooster crows. Yet the bells added a layer of structure, reminding farmers to pray, pause, or adjust their tasks. This created a fusion of sacred and practical time, woven into the daily grind. You notice a group of women washing clothes at the river. When the bell rings, they stop mid-laughter, bow their heads for a quick prayer, then return to scrubbing. Quirky tidbit number 2. Travelers once wrote that villagers could be seen in mid-plow or mid-bargain, suddenly halting for a brief cross at the sound of the bell. To outsiders, it looked like time itself had hiccuped across the whole valley. Joke 2 splashes with the river. Imagine your entire workplace freezing mid-task because someone upstairs rang a bronze alarm. Sorry, boss. Had to pray. Be back in 30 seconds. You climb a hill overlooking both monastery and village. From here, the scene looks like choreography. Bowls dripping in shadowy courtyards, bells booming across the air, villagers adjusting their pace. Time radiates outward from stone walls, binding shepherds and scribes, plows and psalms, into one shared cycle. The farmer you saw earlier wipes his brow, leaning on his hoe. "The monk's water tells me when to sow," he says with a grin. "But if they get it wrong, my crops will scold them." His laugh carries across the field, half teasing, half reverent. The monks may measure divine hours, but their bells echo in soil and sweat as well. Joke 3 sways with the wheat. So yes, somewhere in history, a monk's leaky bowl determined when an entire valley had lunch. That's real power. As the sun climbs higher, the rhythm grows seamless. The monastery keeps dripping, the valley keeps working. Neither could imagine life without the other's sound. The sun rises higher, shadows shorten, and the courtyard grows restless. A bell sounds slightly offbeat, and the monks exchange glances. Something is wrong. You walk over to the row of bowls and see it. One has cracked during the night, a fine fracture running down its side. Water seeps out slowly, leaving a dark streak on the stone floor. The hour is slipping away. Mainstream fact: water clocks, especially those made of clay, were fragile. Cracks, leaks, or uneven firing could throw off their accuracy or ruin them altogether. Repairs were constant, and monasteries kept spare vessels ready for emergencies. A novice rushes forward, panic in his eyes. He grabs a lump of waxy resin, trying to patch the crack with trembling fingers. The elder shakes his head and replaces the bowl with another, while the bell striker adjusts his mallet nervously. For a moment, the entire rhythm wobbles. The monks whisper, shuffle, and scowl. Then, finally, the drip resumes, steady again. Quirky tidbit: some chronicles mention novices accidentally knocking bowls over in their clumsiness. One tale describes a sleepy brother who tripped during matins, spilling half the system across the floor. The monks had to guess the remaining hours by instinct until sunrise. Ever since, novices were warned not to stumble over time. Joke 1 stumbles into view. Imagine being remembered for centuries as the guy who literally spilled midnight. But not every mishap was dramatic. Sometimes the bowls clogged with dust or insect wings, making the drips irregular. Other times, mischievous novices nudged them on purpose, testing how long it would take the elders to notice. Monastic discipline might be strict, but human mischief is eternal. Historians still argue whether these minor failures were recorded as serious infractions or tolerated as part of daily life. Some sources emphasize strict punishment for tampering with time. Others hint at a more forgiving attitude, chalking up errors to the frailty of clay and human nature alike. Mainstream fact number 2. Cracked bowls were often recycled into other uses, turned into storage jars, animal feeders, or even planters. Nothing was wasted, not even broken time. You watch as the elder inspects the damaged bowl, muttering that it will now serve the hens. The novice looks mortified, but the elder pats his shoulder and tells him not to worry. Even time grows old and leaks. His words draw chuckles from the other monks, who seem relieved the crisis has passed. Quirky tidbit number 2. One record mentions a monastery keeping a book of misfires, a light-hearted chronicle of every major clock mishap. Entries included phrases like, "The rooster beat us to lauds," or "Brother Johannes stole 10 minutes from the valley." You suspect the monks had more humor about mistakes than they admitted. Joke 2 scribbles in the margin, if medieval monks invented Twitter, their timeline would have been full of time fail posts. The bell finally rings again, slightly later than usual, but still firm. Farmers in the valley shrug, assuming the monks were adjusting their prayers. Only those inside the courtyard know that time nearly cracked apart. The monks reset the bowls, double-check the notches, and resume their rhythm. The novice lingers, ashamed, but one elder tousles his hair, reminding him that the point isn't perfect precision, it's faithfulness. Even a cracked bowl, after all, still holds water for a while. Joke 3 pats the novice on the back. Somewhere in the archives, your clumsiest moment is preserved forever as history's cutest scheduling error. The sun shifts, the bowls steady, and the day marches on, a little wobblier but still intact. The monastery has learned once more that time may be fragile, but devotion can patch even the biggest leaks. The crack in the bowl is forgotten by mid-afternoon when a small procession approaches the monastery gates. Unlike the dusty farmers or curious travelers you've seen before, these visitors wear silks and carry staffs tipped with polished metal. They are envoys of the king, sent to consult with the monks, not about scripture, but about time itself. You slip in behind them as they are led to the courtyard, where the bowls shimmer in the sunlight. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian kings and nobles often relied on monasteries, not only for spiritual authority, but also for practical guidance. Monks were respected as keepers of calendars and hours, consulted when rulers sought auspicious times for proclamations, ceremonies, or even battles. The envoys bow before the abbot, who gestures toward the dripping bowls. One envoy leans closer, intrigued, watching the waterline creep toward its next notch. He asks when the next prayer will sound, and the abbot replies calmly, "In 7 drops time. Drops." The envoy nods, scribbling notes on a wax tablet. Quirky tidbit: some royal chronicles describe kings delaying proclamations until the monk's water had struck the hour, as if legitimacy itself dripped from the bowls. A few even joked that the monks were the true masters of the kingdom's schedule. You imagine a king sighing impatiently, "Tell the bowl to hurry up. I have speeches to give." Joke 1 waves a parchment. Somewhere in history, the phrase "waiting for the paperwork" was actually "waiting for the drip." The abbot explains that tonight's alignment of the bowls and stars marks a favorable hour for announcing a tax decree. The envoys murmur approval, pleased to bring this divine timing back to the royal court. To them, a monk's drip carries more weight than an astrologer's chart. Historians still argue whether these consultations were symbolic or truly influential. Did kings believe monks held mystical authority over time, or did they simply use the monastery's schedule as a convenient way to justify decisions? Surviving chronicles hint at both, piety and pragmatism mixing like water in a bowl. Mainstream fact number 2: Ethiopian monarchs frequently wove religious authority into governance. By aligning decrees with liturgical hours, they framed political acts as divinely timed, bolstering their legitimacy among subjects. You watch as the abbot and envoys step into a shaded chamber, where a larger cistern trickles into carved channels. The abbot demonstrates how the flow will strike the hour precisely at dusk. The envoys exchange glances, impressed. One whispers that Cairo's clocks may be grander, but none sound holier. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some records mention kings gifting monasteries new bells or basins in gratitude for their services of time. In one tale, a ruler presented a golden mallet for striking the prayer bell, a dazzling but probably impractical instrument that monks kept mostly for show. Joke 2 glimmers like polished brass. Imagine being the poor monk stuck using a 20-pound golden hammer at 3 a.m. Divine bling, terrible ergonomics. The meeting ends with blessings, the envoys satisfied, and the monks returning to their rhythm. As the delegation departs, you realize how far the bowl's influence reaches, not only across valleys and fields, but into palaces and councils. Dripping water has become political capital, a tool for aligning earth and heaven, king and peasant, all under the sound of a bell. Joke 3 lingers at the gate. Who knew the kingdom's greatest power broker was a clay pot with a hole in it? The sun dips lower, shadows stretch, and the bowls glisten in the last light. You sense that tonight's bell will not only summon prayers, but also seal a royal decree, echoing beyond the monastery walls into the very heart of the realm. The royal envoys have gone, their polished staffs glinting as they vanish down the mountain path. Evening settles, but the courtyard remains alive with murmurs of comparison. Some monks speak of the golden mallet gift, others whisper about distant lands. You catch fragments, tales of Cairo's clock towers, Damascus's elaborate automata, and Baghdad's famed scholars. It becomes clear that Ethiopia's dripping bowls are part of a much larger conversation, one that stretches across faiths and borders. Mainstream fact: Islamic courts, especially during the Abbasid and later Mamluk periods, became renowned for elaborate water clocks. These devices often featured mechanical birds, doors, and figurines that moved in rhythm with the flow of water. Such marvels were described in Arabic treatises and sometimes gifted between rulers as displays of scientific sophistication. One monk describes a clock he heard about from a traveling merchant, a bronze rooster that crowed every hour as water filled hidden chambers inside its body. Another insists he once saw a sketch of an elephant-shaped clock in an Arab manuscript, complete with a rider who tipped forward when the water reached a certain level. The younger novices gape, half skeptical, half enchanted. Quirky tidbit: the famous 12th century engineer Al-Jazari really did design elephant clocks and other water-driven machines. Though no evidence shows Ethiopian monks saw these directly, stories of them circulated widely, carried by merchants and pilgrims. Imagine a wide-eyed novice hearing about an elephant that told time and wondering if the story was allegory or if elephants in foreign lands were simply punctual. Joke 1 trumpets from the distance. If elephants really kept time, you'd never need a watch. You'd just follow the herd. Historians still argue whether Ethiopia borrowed technical inspiration from Islamic courts or developed its clepsydras independently. Some point to similarities in channel systems and calibration methods, while others emphasize local adaptation shaped by climate and liturgy. The lack of surviving physical artifacts makes firm conclusions elusive, leaving the debate dripping on like the bowls themselves. Mainstream fact number 2. Ethiopia's Christian kingdom had centuries of contact with Islamic neighbors, through both trade and diplomacy. Exchange of ideas about science, astronomy, and timekeeping almost certainly occurred, even if filtered through local needs. A monk frowns at the tales of extravagant automata. Roosters carved from bronze may crow, he mutters, but our clay bowls ring the bell just as true. His tone holds a mix of pride and defensiveness. The others chuckle, nodding. They know their system lacks spectacle, but in its simplicity lies resilience. Quirky tidbit number 2. One legend claims a Muslim traveler, after seeing the monastery's humble bowls, declared, "You have no elephants, but you have patience. That is the better clock." Whether true or invented by monks later, the story reveals their sense of humor about being overshadowed by more glamorous inventions. Joke 2 bows politely. Somewhere, a clay bowl is still smirking. Sure, I don't roar, but I've been dripping faithfully for 400 years. The conversation winds down, chants resume, and you realize the monks are aware of their place in the world's clockwork. They know of bronze roosters and elephant automata, but they are content with their dripping bowls, convinced that time's truest measure is found in stillness, not spectacle. Joke 3 settles on the rim. Maybe that's the real lesson. The fancier the clock, the more likely it is to break. The humble drip always wins. The bell sounds again, rolling over the valley as stars prick the sky. For a moment, you imagine those distant courts, Cairo's towers, Damascus's fountains, listening too, joined invisibly by the same pursuit. To capture the slippery essence of time, drop by drop, tick by tick. Night falls heavy, the chants soften, and the bowls keep dripping. But as centuries pass, the rhythm begins to change, not because the water falters, but because new machines arrive. Metal gears, swinging pendulums, ticking weights, inventions from Europe creep slowly into Ethiopia, brought by traders, missionaries, and diplomats. For the first time, the humble clepsydras face competition not from the stars, but from iron. Mainstream fact: by the 17th and 18th centuries, mechanical clocks spread widely across the world. Jesuit missionaries in particular brought European clocks to Ethiopia, often gifting them to nobles or churches. Some were ornate tower clocks, others portable table clocks. Their accuracy and novelty dazzled audiences, though monasteries sometimes viewed them with suspicion. In the monastery courtyard, a nobleman once presented a gleaming brass clock, its face decorated with Roman numerals the monks could barely decipher. It ticked, chimed, and even struck the hour without needing a dripping bowl. The monks gathered around, intrigued but wary. One elder leaned close, then muttered, "It breathes without water. Can such a thing be trusted?" Quirky tidbit. A chronicle mentions a mechanical clock gifted to the Ethiopian court that chimed loudly at noon, so loudly that horses panicked and servants dropped trays. The monks joked that it was less a clock and more a weapon. Joke 1 clangs into the story. Imagine inventing the first alarm clock so startling it makes half the palace spill its lunch. Still, the gears kept spreading. Younger monks were fascinated by their steady ticks, so unlike the elastic drip of water. To them, mechanical clocks seemed like miracles, unaffected by evaporation, by heat, by cracked clay. Elders frowned, sensing that something more than bowls was at stake. To them, the dripping water wasn't just practical, it was spiritual, a reminder of patience, fragility, and God's flow through creation. Could a ticking spring convey the same? Historians still argue whether monasteries adopted mechanical clocks eagerly or resisted them. Some evidence suggests certain communities embraced the accuracy, integrating gears alongside bowls. Others clung to tradition, letting water define time until well into the modern era. The truth likely varies by region and circumstance. Mainstream fact number 2. By the 19th century, imported clocks, both European and Ottoman, became common in Ethiopian churches and noble households. Water clocks faded into obscurity, remembered mostly in manuscripts and oral traditions. One monk recalls an early experiment. The abbot placed a ticking table clock beside the bowls, ordering both to run through the night. By dawn, the water had slowed with the cold, while the clock ticked on relentlessly. The abbot scowled, but admitted the gears were right. Still, he struck the bell according to the bowl, not the machine. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some said monks continued to use water clocks at night long after owning mechanical ones, because the sound of dripping helped them stay awake during vigils. Silence was too dangerous. It invited drowsiness. Joke 2 yawns in the shadows. You thought your white noise machine was modern, but monks were basically using dripping bowls as their sleep soundtrack centuries ago. Over time, though, the bowls grew dusty. Novices were no longer trained to carve notches or patch cracks. Instead, they were sent to wind gears or polish brass faces. The courtyard, once alive with plinks and ripples, echoed now with metallic ticks. For some monks, it felt like progress. For others, a quiet grief. Joke 3 sighs from the cistern. Somewhere, an abandoned clay bowl is sulking, saying, "Fine, let the fancy gears have their turn. I'll just retire with the chickens." The bell still rings, of course, but its source has shifted. No longer tied to dripping patience, it follows the tick of imported gears. The monks pray, as they always did, but something subtle has changed. Where water once stretched and stumbled with the seasons, the machine now marches on, unwavering. For better or worse, time has become harder, sharper, less forgiving. Centuries drift by, and the monastery changes again. The bowls, once the heart of its rhythm, now sit forgotten in storerooms, their rims chipped, their surfaces dulled by dust. A few lie cracked in corners, repurposed as planters for herbs. Others survive only in fragments, shards of clay tucked into museum drawers, or described in faded manuscripts. Time, ironically, has not been kind to timekeepers. Mainstream fact: very few Ethiopian water clocks survive today in physical form. Most evidence comes from manuscripts, chronicles, or accounts by travelers. Some fragments of carved stone basins are housed in regional museums, but complete examples are rare. Scholars reconstruct their function largely through textual hints and comparison with other traditions. You find yourself in one such museum, the air cool and quiet. A shard of clay bowl rests behind glass, labeled with careful handwriting. Fragment of monastic clepsydra. Its surface still shows faint notches, worn nearly invisible. You lean close, imagining water once rising to those marks, monks bending over them, bells ringing because of them. Now it is silent. Quirky tidbit. One Ethiopian manuscript contains doodles of water clocks alongside psalm verses, little sketches of bowls with wavy lines to indicate dripping. Scholars argue whether these were instructional diagrams or simply monks amusing themselves during long vigils. Either way, they're the closest thing to blueprints left. Joke 1 taps the glass. Imagine the curator explaining to visitors, "This broken bowl once controlled the sleeping habits of an entire valley." Not the most obvious resume for pottery. Historians still argue whether the disappearance of water clocks was gradual or sudden. Some claim they faded quietly as mechanical clocks spread in the 18th and 19th centuries. Others suggest they lingered in isolated monasteries much longer, continuing alongside gears until electricity finally swept them away. Oral traditions hint that in some places, dripping bowls were used into the 20th century. Though without physical proof, the debate remains unresolved. Mainstream fact number 2. Ethiopia's manuscripts often preserve more than just theology. They contain practical notes on calendars, astronomy, and sometimes timekeeping devices. These written traces are essential for understanding the role of clepsydras, even when the bowls themselves no longer survive. A scholar nearby tells you that fragments of these bowls are studied not only for archaeology, but also for acoustics. The grooves and thickness hint at how water might have sounded dripping into them. The idea that time was measured not just visually but audibly, by listening to drops, adds a new layer to the story. Quirky tidbit number 2. One cracked basin, discovered near a monastery ruin, was found with coins wedged in its seam. No one knows whether this was a repair attempt or an offering, but it has sparked lively debates. Was the monk patching time with currency, or was someone tipping the clock for good luck? Joke 2 jingles in the display case. Imagine your repair guy saying, "Yeah, I fixed your clock with pocket change." Technically, not wrong. You move on, past manuscripts, sketches, and shards. Each one feels less like a relic and more like a whisper of dripping you can no longer hear. But as you pause, you realize that absence itself has a sound. Quiet, heavy, waiting. The bowls may be gone, but their rhythm lingers in memory. In the bells that still ring, in the pages still copied by candlelight. Joke 3 sighs with the dust. History has a sense of humor. Sometimes the most powerful machines leave behind nothing but broken pottery. You leave the museum and glance back one last time at the fragment in its glass case. It seems small, fragile, almost trivial. And yet, once upon a time, it ordered knights, ruled prayers, guided farmers, and even dictated kings. Not bad for a chipped piece of clay. The museum fades, and you find yourself once again on the plateau, beneath a sky bright with stars. The monastery stands quiet, its bells polished, its gears wound. Yet if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the older rhythm beneath it all. The plink of water in clay bowls, the ripple in stone basins, the hush of monks waiting for the next drop. Time here is more than numbers. It is breath, devotion, and silence stitched together. Mainstream fact: though water clocks themselves have vanished from active use in Ethiopia, the sense of rhythmic, prayer-centered time still defines monastic life. Services continue at canonical hours, bells still ring, and liturgical cycles carry the same ancient structure, even if their mechanisms have changed. The spirit of the clepsydra lingers in every pause between chants. A monk walks by, his steps slow and deliberate. He carries no bowl, no mallet, just a string of prayer beads. Each bead he touches is like a drop of water. Each whispered prayer another ripple. You realize the bowls may have cracked, but their logic lives on in these gestures, in patience, in repetition, in the willingness to let time drip instead of race. Quirky tidbit: Some modern Ethiopian monks still refer to prayer intervals as the drops, even though no bowls mark them anymore. The language has outlasted the device, proof that habits can echo longer than artifacts. Joke 1 rests against the wall. The bowls may be gone, but apparently the monk's vocabulary didn't get the memo. Historians still argue whether clepsydras truly shaped Ethiopian spirituality, or if they were just convenient tools layered onto deeper traditions. But standing here, you feel that the very act of listening to water measure hours must have left a permanent imprint, teaching generations of monks to find holiness in slowness, in patience, in the fragile persistence of droplets. Mainstream fact number 2. Modern Ethiopian liturgy still bears the fingerprints of Saint Yared's chant cycles, built centuries ago to match the hours kept by water and stars. Even if the bowls are gone, the rhythm remains unbroken. Quirky tidbit number 2. Villagers in some valleys still tell stories of monks who could hear time, describing how they sat so silently that the drip of a clepsydra became louder than speech. The phrase survives as a compliment for anyone who listens more than they talk. Joke 2 drips into the silence. Imagine being remembered not for what you said, but for how well you heard a leaky pot. You step into the chapel one last time. The bells strike, deep and resonant, filling the valley. You know they are rung by gears now, but in your mind you hear water. Each note seems to carry a memory of clay bowls, cracked but faithful, dripping time into the silence of centuries. Joke 3 echoes with the bell. If patience were a ringtone, it would sound exactly like this. The service ends. The monks file out, their robes whispering, their sandals brushing stone. You follow them into the night air, where the stars burn above and the earth breathes below. And you realize that in this monastery, time is not something to chase or conquer. It is something to hold gently, like water in your palm, knowing it will slip away, but cherishing the coolness while it lasts. And now, as the night settles over the highlands, let your own thoughts soften. Picture the bowls, still dripping in their quiet courtyard, each drop falling slower, slower, until silence takes over. Imagine the monks bowing their heads, not hurried, not worried, simply resting in the rhythm that has guided them for centuries. The stars above shimmer like patient bells, their light traveling slowly across the dark. The mountains cradle you in their stillness, the air cool and safe. You feel the steadiness of water, the calm of prayer, the peace of time unhurried. Breathe deeply, as though each breath is another drop falling into the bowl. Inhale and exhale. Let the rhythm carry you. With every breath, the world grows quieter, the body softer, the mind gentler. The monks sleep now, their bells silent, their bowls empty. And you too can rest, knowing that time keeps its rhythm without your help. The drops have fallen, the night is full, and you are safe within it. Good night, my friend. Sleep well.